By the late 90s, the fifth generation of gaming was wrapping up. The original Sony PlayStation had blown away the expectations of both gamers and publishers, and the decision to target a wider demographic than the likes of Nintendo changed the way people perceived games and cemented their lead over the other consoles. Whilst people initially wrote Sony off as just another tech company trying to throw their hat in the ring, Sony spent the fifth generation cultivating close partnerships with publishers to ensure the best talent in game development was working on their platform. And with the likes of Namco, Konami and Square ditching Nintendo for the appeal of the PlayStation, Sony dominated over the fifth generation, and with the company firing on all cylinders by the end of the 90s, all they had to do was change into a higher gear and put their foot down. Announced in March of '99, it was immediately apparent that this really was a PlayStation sequel, a PlayStation 2 if you will. Announced 4 months after the Dreamcast's Japanese release, it was clear that this new machine offered more value than Sega's console, and with the weight of Sony's third-party publishers behind them, gamers could really see the potential that this new machine had. Called the Emotion Engine by Sony's marketing team, the 294MHz CPU, co-developed by both Sony and Toshiba, is what ended up powering the PlayStation 2, and along with its graphics synthesizer, meant that the PS2 was capable of over 60 million polygons a second. The games ran on standard DVDs. Comparing that to the GameCube's mini DVD and the Dreamcast GD-ROM discs, the games ran just on standard DVD discs, which meant that not only could you watch DVD movies on your console, but also meant that games could run up to 8.5 gigabytes in size, which absolutely exploded the scope that the games could be on the platform. Now, with hardware that would let developers build games bigger and better than the competition, the inclusion of a DVD player, 60% market share, and the success of the PlayStation 1, Sony knew they had a better grip on both gamers and publishers than anyone else in the industry. And with its eventual release in March 2000 in Japan, North America in October, and the rest of the world by November, the PlayStation 2 was an instant hit. However, the sixth generation of gaming was still getting off to a rocky start, and while the Dreamcast seemed to be off to a good start, selling 1 million units in the first 2 months of its release, the PlayStation ended up absolutely decimating this by selling 1 million units on its launch day alone in Japan. And despite the console being priced $100 less than the PlayStation 2, console sales dwindled, and with the likes of Nintendo and Microsoft breathing down their necks, Sega officially conceded and in March of 2001 officially ceased production of hardware and reorganised itself as a third-party developer. So by the end of that year, Nintendo had released the GameCube and Microsoft had finally entered the gaming market with its Xbox. The title fight seemed like anybody's to lose. Each console had its own thing going for it. The GameCube, for example, was the cheapest of the three and had Nintendo's big IPs. The Xbox was the most powerful and it had the best form of online multiplayer. And the PS2 had DVD playback straight out of the box and a vast library of excellent games to play on it straight away. However, what you really need to remember is that because Sega died a death in early 2001, the PlayStation 2 was the only next-gen console on sale at that time, and with it essentially being the cheapest DVD player on the market with a free games console included, consumers ended up flocking to it like moths to a flame. But enough about DVDs, what is the console actually like to look at? Well, for starters, it was initially only released in black. The design was very similar to that of the Atari 030 Microbox, being sharp, angular, and commanding in its design. PlayStation 2 was designed to look more powerful and more sophisticated than its predecessor. The blue logo on the black background was chosen as it signified the blue of the earth surrounded by the vastness of space, perhaps signifying how the scope of games would increase dramatically with the new console. But what I think really worked in the console's favour was just how well it blended all of the different attributes into its design. Its size and shape means that you know it has serious power behind it, while the DVD tray being similar in its use to a standard DVD player meant that it didn't look out of place when being used as such. Compare all of this to the likes of its competition, the Xbox was just way too big and bulky, and the GameCube was just childish. Now that's not to say I don't like the design of the GameCube, in fact I'd say it's probably my favourite of the three, but from a design standpoint, the more immature style of the GameCube meant that some people wrote it off before even thinking about games, simply just because it looked too childish. And while the Xbox had a similar "this is for adults" type of style going for it, The PS2 also had this, and its massive size, especially when compared to the redesigned PlayStation, meant that while it looked powerful, it was definitely not sleek or sexy, and it felt more like a big fat American pony car compared to a lightweight Japanese sports car. PS2 did differ in one design aspect compared to the others, however. Taking a look at the console, we have the AC input, the AV out, the optical audio, and the expansion bay, whilst on the front we have the power and reset button, the eject button, the disc tray, 2 USB ports, mini firewire on some models, and the good old memory card and controller ports. Unlike the Dreamcast, the GameCube, and the Xbox, however, the PlayStation 2 only came with 2 controller ports. Sure, the multi-tap was a thing, much like the original PlayStation had, but this meant you had to buy yet another accessory for your system just to bring it up to par with the others. This is by the by though, and unless you were going for a very specific set of games, something like a party game or something like that, you never really had use of it, and I myself, I own a multi-tap, I've never used it in my life, and if I want a party game I go for a GameCube. And with the price of multi-taps nowadays, it's not really such a big problem anymore. Now, something I did mention earlier, and something I also touched on in my GameCube video, was the PlayStation used standard DVD discs. And while yes, there were many different factors which culminated together to make the PS2 just such a powerhouse in the market, the PlayStation 2 was always destined for greatness. For example, just being able to play movies out of the box at a time when DVD players were only just starting to come down to the games console prices meant that for the same price you essentially got a free games console. The other big side effect of choosing DVDs as the storage medium meant that you gained a lot of space compared to the GameCube and the Dreamcast. Like I said, the PlayStation 2 discs could hold between 4.5 and 8.5 gigabytes of data. This meant that PlayStation 2 could have massive worlds, hundreds of levels, thousands of character models on a single disc. Compared to the GameCube games, they just paled in comparison. You see, they'd either have to be dumbed down to fit, span across multiple discs, or not be ported at all. I mean, there's a reason that games like Gran Turismo 4, for example, it's got 721 different car models, it's got 51 different tracks, the most comprehensive photo editor in a game up until that point, endless car customization, 556 different races, not including the licenses that you have to do, an arcade mode, and over 100 different music tracks, as well as many more features, and all of that was squeezed onto just a PlayStation 2 disc. What this means is that if you wanted to do this on the GameCube with the more powerful hardware that it gave you, you'd need at least 6 discs to fit all of that content onto the GameCube. So yeah, while the GameCube was technically more powerful, and it was easier to develop for, and it was cheaper, there's a very good reason why both gamers and developers stuck with the PlayStation 2 instead of jumping ship. And that's not even taking into account the other big selling point of this console. Along with being shipped on DVDs, PlayStation 2 games, if they were small enough, could be shipped on CDs, saving on manufacturing costs. And while not many games were small enough to fit on a standard size CD, this meant that a PS2 also doubled as a CD player. And what else uses CDs? Why, PlayStation 1 games, of course. Sony included the original PlayStation 1 CPU in the system on the motherboard. It doubled as its I/O processor. And then when a PlayStation 1 game is detected, the system restarts silently in PS1 mode, effectively disabling the Emotion Engine and running PlayStation 1 games natively without emulation. As a result, this meant that the PlayStation 2 could already play a massive game library, which, if you already had a PS1, you probably owned many of your favourites that you already had, and it meant that gamers who were buying a PS2 at launch, who still had PS1 games they wanted to buy or wanted to finish, they wouldn't be alienated by buying the new console. The main takeaway is this: the Dreamcast just failed miserably. The GameCube had brand image problems, and the Xbox came a little too late. But the PlayStation 2, it happened to be in the right place at the right time. A period where everything needed for the console's success happened to line up perfectly. Much like the results we saw with the Switch and the DS, everything the console needed to cement itself in entertainment history came about for the taking, and take it did. It should come as no surprise then that when we learn that the Xbox and the GameCube only sold close to 25 million units each, paling in comparison to the 160 million that the PlayStation 2 sold, meant that not only did Sony sell more than the entire competition combined, but it cemented it as the best-selling video game console ever released. After all, it had an inbuilt DVD player when others were more expensive. It supported the entire back catalogue of games of its predecessor. A console which in its own right sold over 100 million systems, and some of the most influential games of the time, namely Metal Gear Solid and Grand Theft Auto, they were big ones, they were all exclusives on the console for at least a year, meaning that if you wanted to play them on release when they were new, you needed a PS2. I mean, like I mentioned at the start, the strength of the third-party support on this system was exactly what made the original PlayStation so successful, and Sony managed to do it all over again with their new console. The PS2's lifespan lasted 13 years, and repairs for the console lasted 18. Many of these, in fact 40 million of these units, were being sold after the PS3 had launched, and if that doesn't show how much players loved this system, then nothing will. To put this in even more perspective, the final game released on the PlayStation 2 was Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, which released in the UK on the 8th of November 2013, only 1 week before the PlayStation 4 was released. I mean, that's insane. You could buy a brand new PlayStation 2 game and then a week later buy your PS4. To wrap all this up then, if you've never owned a PS2, now is the time. With the number of games and units sold, they're not too expensive, and despite some games reappearing on PlayStation Plus, many hidden gems are still stuck on this console. It is well worth it to own one again, and I highly recommend for you to give one a go. You'll be surprised at how many of the games still feel tight and modern to play, and with hours of endless content, and my personal favourite game of all time appearing on this system, it's no wonder I regard it as one of my top 3 consoles of all time, and the world's #1, even almost 25 years later. Now that's all for this one, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below if you enjoyed it and what you enjoyed. If there's any future content you'd like to see, please let me know again down below, and don't forget to give this a like and a thumbs up. But for now, I thank you all very much for watching, and for all things retro gaming, keep it locked to the channel that talks about when games were fun. Bye bye.